The third of my stories, A Prideful Fall to Humility. 1,272,000,000 in 6 months. A record-shattering performance by Across Stellar War, the most recent film by megastar producer Deval Aknam, an American filmmaker and playboy. Deval had made it big, and he knew it. He basked and wallowed in the compliments and the laud of his friends, critics, even rival filmmakers, who praised his storytelling, his cinematography, his CGI effects, no credit given to those teams, of course, and the general impact of the film upon the industry. Each iota of praise made his ego, his sense of self-pride, inflate to massive proportions. Such, though, that whenever even a minor comparison of his film to another that the director believed was inferior, even in the slightest, sent him careening into a violent rage. No opposing film irked Deval more so than a recent low-budget telling of a poor black family's arduous journey across the Atlantic Ocean, from war-torn, desertous Sudan to the rolling mountains and frozen tundras of Alaska, from death to joy. This family, racked and devastated at the loss of their youngest son to the recent Sudanese war, were forced to start from nothing, yet still, they moved about their lives with a grace, a stillness, and a kindness not typically seen in most other blockbuster films. This new, novel film, lacking in fiery explosions, long-winded monologues, and graphic deaths, all things Deval deemed essential in his films, took the world of cinema by absolute storm, eclipsing the other leading pictures 10-1, including Across Stellar War, which damaged Deval's once unshakable pride to the core. In the light of this, Deval carried his wounded yet still very functional pride to the home of the director of this new film, hoping to intimidate this new director with threats of sabotage and counter-marketing. His plan was foolproof. Or was it? After some digging and searching the nearby neighborhoods, the disgruntled director finally found what he had been seeking out: the home of 15-year-old director and Sudanese migrant, Noctu Develi. Grinning with the pride of having found his rival, he knocked thrice upon the door. To his surprise, the door immediately swung open, and standing in the threshold stood, as was reported, a small, humbly dressed, calmly smiling young man. This could only be Noctu, the child director. Smirking, Deval started to speak. "Ha! I knew I'd find you. Now, let's get to... And I know you'd find me." A deep, booming voice, impossibly resonant for a boy of Noctu's stature and age, cascaded from his lips immediately. All at once, Deval's words left him. His eyes widened as he attempted to step backwards. Deval's heel thudded dreadfully against the door as it suddenly closed behind him. The prideful filmmaker was trapped. "How?" Deval stammered, trying to make sense of what was happening. Noctu stepped back, beckoning for his frightened guest to join him in 2 seats before an oven fireplace. It was there that Noctu spoke again. "I knew you were coming. I have known since I produced that film. I take little pride in knowing this, since yours was oozing from your pores, from the time since yours was released." Visibly confused atop his noticeable uneasiness, Deval had no retort. He could only listen. "In the time since your film was released upon the world, I have watched your pride and your ego inflate, destroying your friendships, your repertoire, and most importantly, your sense of humility. These are concerning issues and ailments, no?" Deval could only manage a frightened nod in response. Smiling, Noctu arose, and as he did, his humble clothes and small 15-year-old frame melted away, newly replaced by a much taller figure, clad in a brilliant white four-piece tuxedo. His once dark skin was replaced with glittering, gleaming purple obsidian, with two glowing violet eyes embedded in his face. Again he spoke. I am the sin of pride. Few look upon me and live to remember that. At that, Duval blanched to an even paler shade. However, the sin spoke once more, clasping his hands behind his back as he stood, I see great potential in you. For though your self-pride and adoration is, or hopefully now, was, pride emphasized, nearly knocking David's chair and him with it to the floor, with the force of it, quite expansive. You have immense potential for growth in your humility. The voice became softer towards the end of this speech. Again, Duval remained speechless, stunnedly unable to respond. He simply listened. Thus, Pride continued, I bestow upon you a task. Again, Duval nodded, but he leaned forward in his chair, far more compelled to listen. You will leave here, but for 1 year, you will do nothing. Pride roared the emphatic word with great force. But ask others about themselves. You will practice constant humility by learning, but also writing about others. Document and inscribe what you find. And remember, I will be watching. Remaining completely speechless, Duval again could do nothing but nod. This sin's words had shaken and stirred him to his very core. Finally, at the end of this 1 year, you are to compile everything you have learned and gathered. Show me you can do what I demand, and your pride and conceitedness will be replaced with humility and a new sense of appreciation for the lives and the pride of those you once scoffed at. With that, the sin turned on his heel and melted into the ground before Duval's eyes, who promptly sank into his chair and wept bitterly. Over the course of the next year, a remarkable shift occurred in Duval's demeanor, life, and pridefulness. He committed himself dutifully to rigorously becoming a more humble man, and the benefits were nearly immediate. As he asked and inquired about the lives of others instead of gloating and boasting of his own accolades, his once inflated heart and ego healed and transformed. After that year had passed by, the man who was once Duval, a boastful, flamboyant, truly prideful man, had undergone a truly massive change. It was time to visit Pride once more. Embarking to Nocto's humble home once more, again knocking thrice. Like before, the door swung open, and Duval entered, lowering his head humbly. Pride once again stood before him and beckoned him in as an old friend would. Tell me, the obsidian sin rumbled softly, what have you learned? And Duval could only smile, tears streaming down his face, as he said in response, one must truly know pride to know humility, but to know the extent of one's own destructive self-obsession, one must truly appreciate another's unforced humbleness.